Welcome to the session. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Tonight, we will talk about creating, scaling, and delivering great product documentation with Confluence and Scroll apps. So, I'll start off with a personal anecdote. A couple of weeks ago, I was looking through my drawer, that messy junk drawer in the kitchen that we all have. Let's not pretend that you don't have that one. And I was looking for a pair of scissors there. And obviously, I found everything but a pair of scissors, old batteries, a handful of mismatched Allen keys, I don't know, single chopstick there from a restaurant I visited 5 years ago, and an unholy number of manuals of devices I haven't owned in a while. Eventually, yes, I found the scissors, but a few curse words later and a lot of rummaging, but reminded me of how documentation is for a lot of people, and sadly, it was for me in some of the companies I have seen and worked with before joining K15T. So essentially, documentation is there, the information is there, but people have to rummage and rummage through a lot of different tools. So there's this junk drawer of different tools. Maybe there's a Confluence space for one team, a shared drive for with a folder called final version 3, which is definitely not the final version. And maybe there's some email attachments flying around. Nobody has a clear space or place, and nobody knows where to find the right content and up-to-date version of the documentation. And when you and your team can't find it, then you can be sure that your users can't find it either. Luckily, that's where we come in tonight. So we are here to show you how to turn that junk drawer of information and knowledge into a well-organized toolbox. And I'll just walk you through the agenda slides today. So first up, we'll talk about actually a little bit of theory of great documentation, or 5 steps of creating great documentation, followed by a real life customer story. Emplifi, we're power users of Confluence and Scroll Apps, and we'll show you how they did it and how they created great product documentation using those tools. Then we'll dive deeper into a live demo where we will start from scratch from a Confluence page or a bunch of pages, and then actually show you how to build a help center or basically export your documentation and create great public product documentation. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session with the experts where you can ask all your questions. And who are the experts we are talking about? It's definitely not me, but I'm still here. My name is Omar. I am the product marketing manager at K15T. And I'm essentially the person who's behind all the pesky emails you get before and after a webinar. So you know who to blame or curse afterwards. With me is the one and only David Meininger, who is an absolute veteran in the space of Confluence-based product documentation. You want to say hi, David?
Hi, very flattering introduction there, Umar. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Perfect. Great to have you here. And then the man, the myth, the legend, we have for first time in public view, Chris Klima from the representing K15T this time around. So might be a bit of news for a lot of people who know us and know Chris Klima. And it's absolute delight to have you here, Chris. Do you want to say hi to everyone?
I want to say hi to everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And I especially want to thank my former team at Emplifi, Rod and Jenny, if you recall. Thank you very much. Carry the torch.
Perfect. Great to have you here and see a lot of your colleagues as attendees as well. So that's awesome. So who are we? Really quick introduction. K15T, we were founded in 2009. So this year we turned 16 years old, and we are based in Stuttgart, but everybody works. A lot of us work from all over the world. What do we do at K15T? So we believe Atlassian products are a really good base for every team to be able to collaborate effectively and manage knowledge across their organization. But how do you get that information and knowledge to your customers or partners or other stakeholders? We see that as a big challenge, and that's where we come in. So at K15T, our goal is to convey and help you share knowledge or your knowledge everywhere it's needed. So we build apps and solutions that help enable teams share information and knowledge. They create in Confluence and Jira with those who need it the most at the place where they need it the most. A quick introduction, and then now we start off with a poll before we dive into the actual agenda, just so we get a sense of what drew you to the live session. No pun intended. And so I think Gabe has already started the poll there. And so which tools are you currently using to manage your documentation and information at your company? Is it a Confluence? And so if that's the case, then you're already in the right session and you're already ahead of the curve, but you probably are looking for something to add on to that tool. Maybe it's a combination of things. So could be that you're using Google Docs or Word for note taking, but also SharePoint or one of those Google Drives, Dropbox for file storage, maybe some sort of wikis or Notion or something like that for internal communication as well. I see the scales are still moving a bit, but so let's just wait for a couple more seconds before we end the poll. And in case I forgot something on the list, which I'm pretty sure I did, then just drop it in the chat and we can go through that as well. I'd love to know if there are other tools that you're using. So Laura is using pen and paper as well. Okay, going old school. That's respect for that. Not sure how efficient it is, but okay. FrameMaker. Oh yeah, I've heard of that. It's by Adobe, right? As a documentation tool, I never understood the name, but okay. Perfect. So we can end the poll and just share the results. So Confluence, 83%. So we have the right audience here. That's good news. And then there's a good spread of other tools as well in there. Google Docs, SharePoint, and people have marked others as well. So besides FrameMaker and pen and paper, if there's something else that you want to share, then you can do that as well. Then we will stop sharing the poll and dive into the first part of this live session. So what are the stages of documentation lifecycle? I will give you a quick overview because our experts here will then go deeper into each step of the way and essentially dive deeper into the practical aspects of it. So this is kind of a graphic that you will see quite often in this live session. And this will be the kind of a framework for us to be used throughout the session. I'll just quickly run through it. So plan as self-evident. Before you write, you need to define the goal of your content. Who is it for? And what do they need to know about what you're writing? Then we have creation part. So that's probably the most important and interesting part for all the technical authors out there. So you start from something as simple as creating a structure for your documentation, and then you move on to more complicated tasks like, I don't know, content reuse or tailoring your content for your audience and version control and things like that. And we will go a little bit deeper into how you can do all of those things in Confluence. Then reviewing and tracking changes essentially means that you use some of the functionalities in Confluence like comments, but also how you can enhance that using some of the additional apps there. Then publishing the content, essentially, how do you take that all of the information that's inside Confluence and then you kind of share it with the people who need it? So either in online or offline formats. We will again go deeper into how you can do that practically. And the fun is not over until you have the maintenance part. So we will discuss a little bit about how you can make sure that the documentation is findable, usable, and actionable. So as I mentioned, we'll discuss the practical part of it, but in case you wanna learn a little bit more about the theoretical aspect of it, and we did discuss it in one of our live streams, I think last month. Gabe will drop the link in the chat for the live stream, and it's a free resource. You can check it out if you want. But for now, for this session, we will go into the customer story that we promised, or the practical example of good product documentation. So this is a story of one of our power customers, Emplifi. And what is Emplifi, or who's Emplifi? It's a US-based software company for about 700 people. They help us help more than 20,000 companies of all sizes keep track of their social media presences. Within the company, they're using Jira, JSM, and Confluence for team collaboration and project management. The use of scroll apps centers around their technical documentation, like their product documentation and creation of help centers. So what makes this story really interesting for me is that they actually acquired around 4 different companies in a quite short period of time. This meant that they had their hands full when they wanted to bring together all of the information and knowledge from all these different companies they had acquired and bring everyone to the same page. So their product documentation drawer, in essence, was quite messy at the start and consisted of 5 different tools. Some documentation was in Confluence, but also within other tools like Zendesk, for example. And they just wanted to settle on one tool for all internal and external knowledge management in the team. And of course, they wanted to make that information available to the end users in a format the users would recognize and in places that needed it the most. Like all 9 help centers are even directly within product, like in-app help. So in the end, the Atlassian Cloud Tools won, as I mentioned earlier. So essentially Confluence, they're using Confluence for the ease of use, collaborative nature, and the modular aspect of it. Lucky for us, we have Chris, as you already know here, and Chris was leading the whole change and transformation there and implemented throughout the documentation lifecycle. So we can hear straight from the horse's mouth there. And Chris, first question for you for this transformation. What was the hardest part when you tried to bring all those different tools and documentation sources into a single system?
I guess finding out what was where and how it all worked together. That I think was the hardest part. As your illustration with the drawer illustrates, there were multiple versions of multiple documents that people created for themselves when they realized that whatever they got from somebody else wasn't really up to date. And suddenly you have multiple sorts of truth. And there's not a single point where you can get all the information. So this was singularly the hard part. Everything else, like figuring out the structure and strategy, was a walk in the park compared to that initial phase. And I spent a lot of time talking to stakeholders, people from marketing, support, product, and just trying to get the sense of where everything was. So yeah, organizing the existing content was the hardest part.
Yeah, I could imagine. But of course, the scroll apps were also a big factor in that decision as well. So on top of the Confluence or Atlassian tools that you were using scroll apps like scroll sites for your new help center and scroll documents for things like versioning and documentation management, and variants for content reuse for multiple audiences. So once you had all of the basic setup and you kind of figured out how to bring it all together, then what made you think that you need something more from the basic setup in Confluence? How did adding scroll sites or documents or variants get things sorted the way you needed them?
Okay, so one of the demands was that we have a public and a private or internal documentation side with different layers of details for the 2 audiences. So that was one thing. So I knew that I needed scroll documents with variants for conditional content to make sure that I can author everything in a single space, Confluence space, and then just distribute the content to wherever it needs to be. because otherwise, to achieve that, you would have to work into separate spaces and just duplicate all your work, which makes no sense, and it just adds to the workload. So that was one thing, and as far as I know, and it was definitely the case back then, scroll documents and variants is the only way how to do conditional content on Confluence. So that was frankly a no-brainer. And then there was versioning for one specific product, Emplifi agent. Again, you can only do versioning in scroll documents, which in previous live was called scroll versions. So there you go. And then, well, again, once you have the infrastructure built in Scroll Apps, the only thing that can put it out as a website was Scroll Viewport back then, now Scroll Sites.
Yep.
So it all kind of fell together, and wherever there was a gap, I used a different marketplace app as a sort of to support this whole workflow. But frankly, given the requirements, that was a no-brainer. And also, the one of the requirements was that internal site should be accessible to people who don't have seats on Confluence.
Right. Okay.
And again, viewport or scroll sites, like all these boxes. So that was frankly a really easy solution once I figure out the requirements.
Nice. That's good news for us as well. Obviously, lucky for us, because obviously it turned out great for you. This is the beautiful help center that you ended up with. So this is entirely built on Confluence and Scroll sites, starting from a simple Confluence space and page. So it's fully searchable, as you can see. Every help center is there. It's fully indexed. You can switch around to any piece of content you want to add, and then you can embed any kind of content like images or videos in there. But I'll stop harping about it and ask you, Chris, what are you most proud of from the setup?
Well, the fact that it all works as a single tool, which is not always the case if you need to combine multiple apps, especially multiple apps from multiple vendors, but it feels like one cohesive tool, and it's pliable. So if you need to make a change or slightly adjust your workflow, you can. There's room for that. And also, how shall I put this? It's the fact that may not be appreciated for many companies, but if you're doing really short release cycles, like 2 weeks, or maybe you're on a continuous delivery, the fact that you can add, delete, edit in Confluence any page and then publish it to viewport at any time without any dependencies to other pages, that's just that's, I think, is the greatest achievement of this setup. You really have no dependencies, so we can republish the whole thing. Sorry, I'm saying we, I mean guys at Emplifi.
Yes.
I've been with the company only for like 2 weeks now, so
Yeah, it's a new change.
the week we might be confusing at times. But anyway, Emplifi writers can publish or republish documentation at any point between releases multiple times a day without disrupting their workflow, the drafts they already have. And that flexibility in terms of workflow, I think, is the greatest achievement of this setup.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll see how people can actually do that when we come to the demo session. Just another quick screenshot of how the setup looked like on phone. So essentially, it's fully responsive as well, and people can check out the documentation as well. On the go, Gabe will drop a link in the chat for the actual help center in case people in the audience actually want to just test out the documentation center of Emplifi. And just before we head into the demo, this is you, Chris, if I'm not wrong. And those are amazing numbers. So you saved around 30K USD per year and 30% of time using Atlassian tools and Scroll Apps. So I have a follow-up question. So like, what was the driving force behind coming up with this award-winning setup?
I think that it works, and it contributed to It's connected with what the team has achieved outside of documentation. Basically, by building this whole setup, which is extremely efficient and streamlined, we managed to prove to other stakeholders within the company, to product engineering, marketing, and support the value of documentation.
Right.
And we could really turn bad practices to good practices, streamline a lot of processes when it comes to creating documentation, or how we handle releases, how we handle QA, and these sort of things. So if you manage to do as a team of documentation writers within a fairly big company, then it really proves that documentation does have its own value. It contributes to your product, it contributes to your company, and the appreciation that we got either from Emplifi itself or the Atlassian and Atlassian community and Atlassian itself, I guess it's kind of a reward for the hard work that we put into it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I do notice that the term Confluence Cloud is quite highlighted here. So incidentally, we did also hear from Atlassian a couple of days ago that there's also end of life for DC here. So was that part of your decision as well? Like, why did you choose Confluence Cloud?
In my previous company, I used Confluence Server with Scroll Apps for a really similar use case. There was conditional content, there was internal and public side. There were translations, there were versions in a way, and everything being on server, we started migration. Then I left the company and essentially was left in the kind of a limbo between the server environment and the cloud environment. And when I joined Emplifi, which already was on cloud, I had to rewire my brain to stop thinking in terms of how server works, how apps on server can work to the new environment. And for a while, it felt different. But once I figure out the ins and outs of cloud and its flexibility and how well it's connected with Jira, I frankly, and I'm not saying this as a sales pitch, I never look back. Like seriously, I cannot imagine doing this sort of work on this scale on server, even with this sort of a similar apps setup. This is just much better. Not to mention that search on Confluence Cloud is way better than it was on server. The editor, we were wasting hours just trying to get the formatting right on the server because everything was just falling apart. On cloud, you don't have these issues. It's really a fast editor. Go in, write your content, publish.
Right. So I guess that's good news for people who are kind of now nervous about the change or the impending change from DC to cloud. Yeah, Gabriel, could you please drop the link in to the story to what Atlassian published here in the chat, and then also the announcement of the end of life DC, so people who don't know about it can also read about it. So before we head into the demo session and actually see how people can do it for themselves and how they can create the documentation, we'll like to run a quick poll again and see what's the biggest mess right now in your documentation drawer. What is the challenge that's making you lose sleep at night? Is it that you can't find anything, or the search is broken, or it's like all over the place and you can't really look for the things you're looking for? Or is it too many revisions? You don't really know which version is the latest one and you're just winging it, hoping that it is the one. Again, see if files are scattered across all platforms or teams. If there's some problems with reviews, so everybody can just say they're adding their stuff, but there's no real process for reviewing, could also be a problem. If you are struggling to take it out of your, I don't know, the tool you're using, Confluence in this case for most of us, and publishing is a pain, then just let us know as well. And if there's some other challenge, then like to hear about it as well and discuss it here. You have the experts here. You can also drop that in the chat and we can discuss it later on. Laura says document migration. Okay, it could be an interesting topic discuss in the Q&A for sure. I think the scales have started moving now, so you can share the results. And yeah, no single place for single docs for documentation. So that was kind of expected as well. That you need a centralized way of managing things, and I guess the next part of the live session would be perfect for you. Then we have a quick nice split of, I don't know, you can't find anything, there's versioning problems as well, and then some other problems, so probably what Laura was referring to there, the migration issues or conditional publishing as well. Okay, then yeah, you're in for a treat, because now I will hand over to David, who will guide us on how to actually do this. If you want to start from scratch, you have documentation in your Confluence and you want to actually create something similar to what Emplifi did. David, you want to take it away?
Sure. Thanks, Umar. Yeah, as you say, with Amplifi's real world use case and journey kind of outlined here, I think let's return to the documentation lifecycle that you introduced at the beginning and walk through each one of those steps, and not only see how Amplifi handled it, and for that we'll be checking in with Chris every now and then, but also just see what in general is possible with Confluence Cloud specifically, and the scroll apps. And we'll do that while setting up a little fictional company's help center, namely not Scroll, Good Software, our example company trying to get out some software product documentation. And yeah, we're going to be using the same apps, Confluence Cloud, obviously as the basis, and then Scroll Sites, Scroll Documents, and its variants extension. So with that, let's go with the first stage, starting with the planning phase. So I think probably we have at the very beginning the most impactful and the most difficult phase, especially to give generic advice on right here. At the beginning, planning in documentation is not unlike planning in all other projects. In general, the more things you consider from the beginning, the fewer pivotings and restructurings you will have to do later down the road. So I guess the main advice we have here for the planning phase is do have a planning phase. Do think about what it is you're trying to do. Since we're in Confluence, I highly recommend just setting up a whiteboard where you map out the end result that you're trying to set up, with the user doing the reading at the very end of it, and from there work your way back to where they are reading this from, in which form, and how the content gets there, all the way down to the writers and maybe even to the subject matter experts. So here we have some ideas for questions to ask yourself while planning. Oftentimes the requirements for your documentation project already touch on many of these questions, but sometimes important things are kind of left out, or they are implicitly answered differently by the stakeholders and the actual authors. So in order to avoid that, we recommend just considering and putting in writing things like, what are we documenting? Who is going to be reading this? Where will the docs be consumed and in what way? And where do we get the content for it or the knowledge? And once the end result or the end goal is clear, maybe a more specific plan on the doc team organization might make sense, like who is authoring, is someone reviewing, things of that nature. But since documentation projects are all different, I think it's difficult to provide a generic checklist for all types of documentation projects there. But specifically for that, we have a real world example here with Chris. And I think, Chris, you already kind of answered this in an earlier question about this being the most difficult part. So just tracking down where everything is and how you want to rearrange it, right? Was that the biggest difficulty of planning the project at Emplifi?
Well, yes, planning to or strategizing to build the information architecture or the what sort of documentation strategy we want to have. But there's also like a small scale planning for, let's say, new feature, and essentially it's kind of the same thing scaled down, and you already work with the framework that you set up in this strategizing or strategy planning. I would, as a tech writer, I would suggest that you involve your tech writers in the process as soon as possible. If they're on the team, like embedded within your development team from the very beginning, and go through all the interim changes and plannings and give their updates on their progress throughout the whole development, then you really diminish the chance that something will go amiss, that something won't get documented. And also it increases awareness within the development team about what writer actually does, which sometimes it's, well, people have really strange ideas, as any tech writer here can testify. Probably. So yeah, start your planning for any new feature, any update, any deprecation as soon as possible, and do involve writers in the process, or get yourself involved in the process if you can.
Right. Yeah. I mean, just it's not about publishing the first version of it. It's about iterating. That needs to be planned out from the beginning as well. Would you say over communication towards stakeholders about your plans is something that you would generally advise?
What's over communication?
To like even state the obvious, just so you make sure you're on the same page about what you're busy trying to do.
Well, you want to know what is the extent of like what is the new feature, what it does, how it works, work with designers. At Emplifi, writers partner with designers, essentially just getting the sense of the UI for a new feature. You work with Figma. And essentially, you can actually draft your documentation based on Figma prototypes, and then replace screenshots with screenshots from the real thing. But you already have a really solid draft built in of documentation built in way before the release, and then you just fine tune the details. So it does pay off to not over communicate, but ask the right questions at the right time and get yourself involved at the right moment. Obviously, you don't want to sit on every single meeting, especially if you attend all this agile rituals, especially if you support multiple teams. But information flow is crucial. If this gets interrupted, you're missing things.
Interesting tidbit there. This is something that was suggested in our team as well. Why don't we just take screenshots from Figma designs so docs can be ready ahead of time? Cool. Well, I think that's about as much as we can say on planning. Like plans vary widely, I guess, depending on where it is you're trying to go. But just in general, preparation for the future is always something that can be advised. So now we have a lot of steps to cover. So let us move on to the next step, the step of content creation. Now, that is probably what comes to mind first, especially if you're tasked with authoring documentation, is the authoring itself. This is also the step that we at K15T support the most with our scroll apps. So that's why we'll have a little look at some of the helpful authoring features that we provide here. But before we can go deep into the scroll app features here, obviously the main tool for the small scale authoring is Confluence. Confluence might not be the most powerful writing tool out there, especially compared to something like FrameMaker that was mentioned earlier, but it does have a very unique mix of accessibility and great support for distributed and distributed authoring or teamwork in general, an easy to use editor. It's enough structure in the form of pages and page trees and spaces, and great collaboration features that can be used for discussion or feedback. And also, given that we want to talk about apps in a second, that also deserves a mention. Confluence is extensible. So whatever you need the editor to support, it probably can be done with some apps, no matter if you're going all math formulas or diagrams or REST API documentation. All of that is covered by someone. Now let's mention some specific native Confluence features that are particularly useful for authoring documentation. And number one here are page templates, which essentially function as blueprints for your pages. So when creating a new article, you can select a template to have the structure pre-populated right in your editor. This, of course, helps dealing with the blank page problem, and especially if you're a documentation manager trying to enforce some sort of structure in your team. So all of your concept articles and troubleshooting articles or how-tos can have the same structure to them. This can easily be implemented with templates. So yeah, make sure maybe even in the planning phase already to consider templates to maybe create your own templates or customize the packaged Confluence templates to your liking. Another super useful feature in Confluence, it's maybe one could argue more of a review phase feature. It's commenting, especially inline comments. A best practice in general for soliciting technical feedback so you can make sure what you're authoring is correct from your software developer colleagues, for example, is instead of sharing the entire page and asking for their thoughts, just mark the specific paragraph or line or word even where you need their input or their approval and just mention them right there. This makes it so much easier to just pinpoint right where you need the feedback and just get it much quicker from your teammates. Another core feature of Confluence that we actually regularly see people misuse is the page itself. Pages don't have any limits on how much content they can hold in Confluence, so it's tempting to create pages that are just way too long. That makes it difficult to read it or to quickly find relevant information there, even to just load it sometimes. So we definitely recommend breaking up your documentation into many pages and arranging them in some sort of a sensible hierarchy like this. Our previous tip about the templates actually helps enforce a certain scope. So if you're writing a troubleshooting article from a troubleshooting template, it's only going to be about troubleshooting because that's what the templates kind of suggests as a structure. And yeah, and that actually slowly brings us towards the first Confluence app that we're going to be looking at, because the bigger your documentation gets, the more pages you have to manage at once, which can become overwhelming. And our remedy for this here is Scroll Documents, which is our content management app that allows you to manage many pages as one unit of content as a document. For that, you can just use your existing structure. So up until here, this is a normal Confluence space, and you can just define this entire structure here and convert it into a document. Now, a fair question here is, what is a document? And document, I think this is your definition, Chris, is you described it as a virtual space. So naturally, Confluence is segregated into spaces that hold trees of pages. And the document is like a virtual space of flexible size, essentially. You can either have part of your space be a document, or you can enable it in your entire space. You can even have a document that spans many different spaces. And in this example right here, we have those three documents that are all authored in this one space. Because the end goal is the same. You want to define a large number of pages as one documentation because it relates, for example, to one particular product. And as we'll see in just a bit, this document can then be managed, versioned, translated, or published all at once. And as we mentioned earlier, you can simply enable it on your existing documentation page tree, because presumably you most likely already have something in place when you decide that you want to start versioning it, for example, using Scroll Documents. So that is one way. Another way, which is particularly useful for getting new documentation projects started, is to use Scroll Documents to quickly create a bunch of pages and arrange them in a certain order and hierarchy. And you can pull in existing pages from around your wiki and either include them via a macro or just straight up copy them here. Using this, you can really get your documentation going quickly once you have a plan for what the structure should look like, which content can maybe be pulled in from other places in your wiki and which need to be authored from scratch. And that way you can quickly get started and distribute the individual pages to be worked on by your co-authors, or just start filling those pages with content yourself. Now, through one of these ways, what you have created is the working version of your document. If you're authoring content in just regular Confluence, then all you have essentially is your working version. That means if you make changes there, those changes are directly visible to anyone accessing that page. And if you, for example, rework something, then the earlier states will be forever buried somewhere in your page history, but it will disappear from the visible page. Now, Scroll Documents allows you to keep different versions of your entire documentation. So not just one page, but all of them. And before we get into the feature itself, maybe a question here, what even is a version? So versions, as we will use them in this webinar here, are different states of your documentation that correspond to different states of the thing that you're documenting, whether it's a product, a process, or anything else. As we see here, as your product goes through different iterations from 1.0 to 1.1 to version 2 and 3, the manual of the documentation for it has to be iterated on as well. In a way, versions track how your documentation evolves over time. Now, versions are of, I would say, varying importance to different documentation projects. It can be completely vital. For example, if all of these 4 products have been sold to users and are still in active and supported use, that means in your documentation for this product, you need to serve every single one of these user groups because they need the most accurate information for their particular product. Now, on the other hand, if you're documenting a software as a service product, which is updated for everybody using it all at once, then versions, at least in the public documentation, are maybe not necessarily required, but they can still be massively useful internally. So you can do bigger rewrites, reworks, or just edits of your documentation without those changing, spilling over into any public contexts like your help center. Now, coming back to the context of Confluence and Scroll Documents, we've established that we have a working version where we make all of the changes. Here we see that we also now have saved an additional version, which technically is a snapshot copy of the working version made at a certain point in time. In this case, when it exactly resembled the documentation for the product version 1.0. That means your authors can now continue working on the working version while the 1.0 state is safely backed up in a separate page tree and can, as we'll see later, be published or otherwise released at any point in time. And so over time like this, as you develop your documentation further, you can save more and more snapshots and end up with a nice version history that has matching documentation for any of the past versions of your product that might still be in use, or even for reference or audit purposes. It is noteworthy, though, that all of these versions are snapshots of the working version, which always remains in the same place in Confluence. So you can still, for example, bookmark or watch these specific pages, especially as an occasional contributor to the documentation without having to readjust to other working contexts all the time. Now, with all of this theory being in place, Chris, I think the public Emplifi Help Center does not feature any versions, but did you consider versioning and did you end up versioning internally maybe?
The public side that you that was featured here as a screenshot that doesn't have versioning, and it uses the working version because of the continuous delivery. So essentially, it's just one stream of updates. For Emplifi Agent, this combines continuous delivery and a version. So whenever there's a new version, a snapshot is created, the previous snapshot is retired, and it's replaced by the latest one. And this approach allows for publishing updates that are for early access within this working version, which is called the training version, and then the production version remains static until the next release comes. The good thing of this is that each and every single version is editable backwards. So let's say there is a major typo or something happens and you need to go into that version, you can just go in and edit it as any Confluence page. and then just republish viewport. So again, it's not like you create a snapshot which you cannot touch in future. You can edit at will. Obviously, you need to be careful, but it does work, and it provides this extra flexibility, again, without dependencies on any previous version. So it's not like you edit one and then it gets a new override everything existing or everything that came after that. So you can mix and match.
Yeah, you can even insert versions in between. I think that is, if something critical comes up, then you can just create a 2.1 that's based on version 2, even though you haven't touched it maybe in 5 years, but it's still there and it's separate. So yeah, so then it kind of sounds like you were going more the SaaS approach here, where you do version somewhere in the background, mostly for internal purposes there, right? Okay, then I'd say let's move on to the next high-level authoring feature that definitely is prominently visible on the Emplifi Help Center, and it is implemented by variants for scroll documents, and we call it variants, but it's also well known as conditional text or conditional content, and that's like a real time and effort saver if you consider the manual alternatives. So once more, let's consider the conditional content of variant feature on the conceptual level first. So we've seen versions, which represent how your content develops over time. Variants are like different lanes or different flavors, if you will, of your documentation, which in the end also serves the purpose of meeting the needs of different audiences. In this case, however, we're not talking about changes over time. Instead, you might have different plans or tiers or editions of your product. For example, a basic variant of your product that has all the core features, but then you also have the premium and enterprise variants of your product that have more features and thus also need to have these features documented. And this split might be due to different tiers or levels here. It might be due to different operating systems on which your product runs, or different location, or any other criteria, really. What it comes down to is that you have something that's really only one documentation, but you want to have different spins on it depending on who you are serving. So what you really want to avoid is having to essentially author all of these variants of your documentation separately, because that is just 10 times potentially the work. So what you do instead is, as we have pictured here, if we consider a page tree, and this might be your document, then these white pages are documented features that are available for all the different variants. So they are the core or common pages. Then whatever is only relevant to certain audiences are marked as such, here represented with the different colors. So whenever you publish or export just the blue variant here, then the core pages, which are white, and the variant-specific pages for this variant are included, but pages for other variants are not. And so that itself makes these colored pages here conditional. From here, we can go even deeper onto the page level and actually do the same on a paragraph level with the page for these white pages here specifically that are part of multiple variants. For example, if you have a screenshot or some sort of instruction on your page, you might want to have the exact same page with all of the same instruction except for this one, or except for this one screenshot. And include alternatives for the screenshot. For example, if your app looks different on, let's say, iPhone than it does on Android. And that allows you to really consolidate your documentation in just one page tree, or one page in this case, but you still serve slightly different variants of it. Now, returning to the Confluence UI here in Scroll Documents, variants are a property of the document. So here, for example, we have basic, premium, and enterprise variants of the product, for each of which we define variant rules based on Confluence page labels. In this case, as you can see, we have the variant named basic, and it includes all pages that match the rule of being labeled in Confluence with the label basic. So whenever you publish the basic variant, only these pages will be included, as we've just seen in the page tree here. So these pages here presumably are part of a different variant. And and in the end, you can either publish all of your different variants into the same help center, for example, or if you want to keep them secret, you can even spin up a dedicated help center for each one of them. And that brings me to your variant use, Chris. I think you did make heavy use of variants, obviously, and even mentioned using them in your help center as an upselling tool. Do you want to go into that?
That was in the previous company when, as you demonstrated, there were three tiers of the product was basic, premium, and enterprise, something like that. This was used for variants were used for product or for feature segmentation, basically. At Emplifi, the use case is that everything is being authored in a single space, but some content goes to the internal viewport side and some to the public viewport side. And the difference is it's done on the page tree level, so you would have a dedicated section of a tree that would only be internal. Or, for example, in release notes, the internal version of the release notes, which again is a single page in Confluence, there are details about Jira tickets, links to other tools, names of PMs, who to contact, and sometimes additional information, where to find extra content if you are, I don't know, a support engineer, and you need to have more details about something that we don't want to, or Emplifi doesn't want to reveal to end users because of various reasons. And you can mix and match variants. A typical use case would be you have your public documentation and you want to have a early access documentation for specific users. So you can create a new viewport site and add a new variant that contains all the public information and everything that's for the new feature, publish it either as a public or another internal site, and allow users to have full experience of new documentation integrated within the whole documentation body, while keeping your main documentation site intact. And then you essentially just redefine your variants again, and whatever you had in this early access site will be available in your main site. So again, you can mix and match. You can have a variant that's premium and it's translated to German. You have more enterprise customers in China, so enterprise is English and Chinese. I mean, possibilities are endless. You just need to be clever how to deploy labels.
Possibilities are endless. Cool. So being mindful of the time, let us jump ahead into the next steps here. The next one is the review phase. And I think this is one of the most, I would say, volatile stages, because the requirements here might be very different from maybe no review process at all. For example, if you're a sole tech writer documenting something by yourself, or all the way to very heavy multi-stage approval processes you might encounter either in big companies, big teams, or in regulated industries. In general, this is about making sure other people can quality control the author's output. And as such, this is a very feedback and collaboration focused phase. So collaboration features like sharing and commenting, inline comments that we already touched on, are still very much help here. But what we would like to go into here again is keeping track of your reviews on a large scale, if your documentation has many pages. And for that, the tool of choice, not just for Scroll Documents, but for Atlassian in general, is the workflow and the workflow status. And that's something that's well established in Jira as a product, but also many third-party apps introduce page-level workflow management in Confluence. I think, especially in your setup, Chris, maybe Komala document management or AppFox's workflows for Confluence come to mind there, and they can get really deep into workflow modeling, from defining different steps of approvals to different approver groups. And on the fully other end of the spectrum here, we have super simple things like Confluence Cloud's content statuses, which are very simple and easy to use, essentially just colored labels that appear on your page and just signal what status that page might be in. But since we're talking about Scroll Documents, we'll have a look at what Scroll Documents offers here in terms of workflow management. I think we fit somewhere in the middle between these two extremes of powerful and simple. When using Scroll Documents, you can enable a review workflow, which assigns a page level status to your page, which is visible right here in the page byline. So it works as you would expect. Whenever you're drafting a page, your page will be in the status draft. And then once you submit this to get some feedback, it's going to be under review. And then if the reviewer approves it, it will be marked as approved. So this is how it works on the page level. Going into the document manager, you can see the aggregated overview of all of those workflow statuses of all the different pages that you have in your version currently, with green being approved, blue being under review, and gray being in draft. If you need more details even, you can open a workflow report where you can not just see all the statuses, but you can also select as many pages as you like and just set the workflow state for all of them if you would like to re-review, for example, something for accuracy or still currency, I guess. And the best part, besides the overview of the review process, is the fact that Scroll Documents versioning feature and publishing feature is actually aware of the page's workflow status. This means whenever you save a new version, or you have the option to make sure only reviewed pages end up in that version. So whatever has been edited but not reviewed to completion quite yet would instead fall back to an earlier version, resulting in a documentation version that only contains content that actually has been reviewed by your team. And that allows you to essentially, as you alluded to earlier, Chris, to just save a version or publish a version at any time. Without maybe going too deep into the Kamalas of the world, was review and workflows a staple stage in Emplifi setup?
Not in the scroll documents because it wasn't available initially. And again, it's the demand of continuous delivery that like saving a version takes some time, and the flexibility for this instant publishing is it's geared towards different models, so to speak. So that's why the use of Kamala document approval for because it works with the working version in the scroll documents. But that's the only reason why this specific workflow is not implemented.
Yeah. I remember the case. Essentially, your workflow app took care of moving your content elsewhere from where it would get into the public. So that way, you also achieved the very same goal of just being able to publish at any point in time without going around and asking every single author if they're done with their changes, for example. Cool. Then speaking of publishing, that brings us to step number 4, publish. And here we will adhere to Emplifi's use case, and we'll just primarily look at publishing your Confluence authored documentation as an online help center. And for this, we'll look at a different scroll app now, Scroll Sites. Now, Scroll Sites is not really a new app, but it's a new app name. Previously, this app was known as Scroll Viewport and has been out there in the Atlassian marketplace for years. And for the past month, we've been working hard on a new and major update for this app, which is going to be known as Scroll Sites. So if you're familiar with Scroll Viewport already, this is the app Scroll Viewport is about to become. And the foundational idea of Scroll Sites is to author your content collaboratively in Confluence, ideally, though not necessarily, managed by Scroll Documents. From there, you can select that content and publish it as a self-service online help center that no longer has any direct connection to Confluence, really. It doesn't look like Confluence. It's technically run outside of Confluence. And overall, it's just a standalone help center site. But since this is a Confluence app, what remains located in Confluence is the setup of your site, which is what we will be going through right now. Firstly, what we can already see is Scroll Site supports multiple themes. As a side note for people who are already familiar with Scroll Viewport, themes in Scroll Sites are generally more customizable and more versatile. But for the purposes of this demo, we will choose the Help Center theme, the good old reliable, designated to deliver your content as an accessible, easy to navigate help center, which, by the way, is also SEO optimized. So it's perfect for product docs, and that's why we'll start with it. The next step, we just give the site an internal name, and we assign it a domain. This works similarly to Confluence domains. You get to pick your subdomain if it's still free, and later on you can connect your own custom domain to it instead. And then in the next step, you select the content that is to be displayed on your help center. For our demo purposes, we'll select the document that we have been working on up until now. Technically, you can also just select normal Confluence spaces, but selecting the document is what brings the versions, variants, and all the other content management features from your authoring context all the way to your help center. And also you can add any number of content sources. So our own K15T Help Center, for example, features about 15 of them, essentially one documentation for every single app. And yeah, with that, the site itself is created. And what we'll do now is customize it. And site customization in Scroll Sites does not require you to write any code, though you can if you like to. For the Help Center theme, it's just a matter of uploading your assets, like the backdrop here or the logo here, and the tiles that represent individual documentations. Pull the information directly from their document or space, like the image and the description. And, and for the rest of it, you can either switch between different presets for your theme, or you can select theme colors directly or input things like links for your header or footer that then would be displayed somewhere in your help center. And while you are customizing the theme, you can see a preview of the result right here in the editor. You can also switch between different pages. For example, here we're looking at the portal or overview page, which is generally the landing page for your help center. But we can also switch to preview what the article for your individual documentation pages would look like. And once you're done with your theme settings, it's really just a matter of clicking publish on your help center. And your content will then be fused with the theme settings you selected, resulting in a slick-looking online help center that has full search, great SEO optimization, all of the versions and variants that you decided to publish, and all that without the hassle of spinning up a website for the help center yourself. Yeah, now, Chris, when you were searching for solutions for the documentation project at Emplifi, was it the easy and quick publishing that convinced you in the end? You were familiar with a server viewport at this point already, right?
Yes, but since the whole procedural setup was built around Scroll Apps to make conditional content and versioning work with an app that would create a website, Scroll Viewport was the only option. I'm not saying that I got stuck with Scroll Viewport. I'm saying that because it's like Viewport isn't built only as a theme app. It's there is a functionality, especially if you use it with scroll documents and versions and variants, then it's kind of a no-brainer. But the beauty is that whatever you set up in scroll documents gets sort of transferred into Viewport. And again, the speed is great because somebody let's say that we get a message on Slack that there is an error here. This definition changed. Okay, you edit the page, you run it through the workflow, and you publish it in Viewport, and that whole thing can take 5 minutes. I mean, you don't get that level of comfort and flexibility in most other tools. So again, why not use it?
Yep. And you can do it all by yourself. There's no developers or anything involved there. I think that's.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, rebuilding a site that takes hours, like why?
All right. So yeah, interesting. You came for the help center, stayed for the content management and versioning features. Good. Then I think we have talked at length about web publishing, but it's worth noting that your documentation in Confluence, if you're using Scroll Documents, for example, is by no means just a backend for this particular help center website. We're very much believers in the single source of truth concept, and that same document holding your documentation in any of the versions or variants could also be published, for example, within Confluence to your Jira Service Management connected space, maybe, or something that we also support with our scroll apps, our offline file formats, for example, a PDF. And that would create a version of your documentation as a emailable PDF, and might look like something like this. And besides PDF, we also support Microsoft Word and HTML formats, with the latter essentially being an offline version of the Help Center. And all of these follow a very similar flow to scroll sites, where you first configure your theme or template and then select which content is to be exported, resulting in just professionally styled offline documents like these here. And we won't go too deep into the theming and templating aspect here, but feel free to visit our website and check out the PDF template library, an online resource where any of our users can get inspiration or can directly download some of these export templates to use in their own instances. So yeah, enough of publishing, and let's get to the last step, which is not really the end, but more of a new beginning. Because after you're done the publishing and your documentation is out there, that's really when the journey begins. People are going to start looking at it, they're going to start using it, and even aside from releasing new versions or variants, this is when your documentation becomes a living and breathing asset that needs attention, it needs updates, and it needs to be maintained. And just like the planning phase, maintenance of your documentation is highly specific to what you have published and how many people look at it or provide feedback and so on. So just like we did in the planning phase, let's go through some simple considerations here. And I think the main consideration here should go to your audience. As much as you value input from all sides on your documentation, in the end, it's a product that's to be used by your readers. And the quickest way of getting feedback is to first maybe monitor how page views are looking. And that's easy to do using scroll sites because it integrates with web analytics services. But what's not as obvious is how to interpret this data. So throwing this to you, Chris, like if you have a particular page that gets many more views than anything else, like what can this mean in your experience?
Well, it can mean that the content is more on the generic side, and it's being picked up by search engines, and people, even who are not customers, visit this for learning and education, or is the site's being referenced on some forum, which then can drive your number of visitors to incredible heights, or that the product or the feature behind the page is not exactly intuitive, so we need to take a better look at the product. It always depends on context of the you cannot just look at the data and say this is because that. You always need to go deeper and understand the situation. And if you know that there's an issue, or you don't find your feature intuitive in the product, then you cannot fix poor UI with documentation. If you need to do that, if you need to explain your UI with documentation, you should really change the UI.
Yeah, and then, but if you try to do it with documentation, then the result is going to be a lot of visits to a particular documentation page. So I think just being really critical of your own work there is important, and it's not like a blog where just the more views, the better generally.
Yeah, you cannot use it as a sort of you cannot hunt for a high visitors number. You have a dedicated pool of users or a limited pool of users. If your user base grows, your documentation visit numbers will grow too. But it will plateau eventually because you reach a saturation level, and it's not a marketing tool. You can rely on this in marketing. Like, we have this asset, but it's not to drive your sales.
Yeah, maybe to like leave the audience off with a specific best practice here. If you have a site search like Scroll Sites does on the Help Center theme, then you can actually access the search history on your Google Analytics or whatever you're using, and do that and share those searches with your product team. Sometimes you might be surprised what kind of questions people have in general, like the subject area. But what's also interesting is what kind of terminology some of your users might use, and that just is a great tool to learn from your users. Maybe as an author, primarily to adjust your documentation to speak the language that your users speak. But also, you should definitely funnel this back to your product teams and collaborate with support, and just look at this as in a holistic way as possible, and not just, as Chris said, trying to reach big numbers on your documentation views. So yes, I think Omer, with that, we are through the steps, and
I guess you can continue sharing. I'll just wrap it up. Just go to the next slide. And
all right.
Yeah.
And here you go.
Yeah. So this is essentially what David and Chris has talked about. It's just a summary of what tools Emplifi, and in this case, good software use for all of the life cycle stages. In case you want to learn more about what we talked about here, what the apps that we have featured tonight, and then a little bit more about the whole documentation journey, you can head down to k15t.com/solutions/product documentation, and you can scan the QR code here. And before we head into the Q&A session, just a quick reminder of what we are offering here. So you can check out the YouTube channel for our best practice videos, live streams, and YouTube shorts that to help you upskill in Confluence. And our Confluence Collaboration Hub offers more in-depth articles, so check that out as well. And then obviously, please subscribe to the weekly dose of Confluence. It keeps you up to date for all the latest features and tricks and tips that will turn you into a Confluence Pro. And with that, we'll head into the Q&A session. Already saw some questions in there, so we will try to tackle them. I think Laura had a question. How can we track and measure end user satisfaction with published articles using scroll reports or sites? So I think Chris already shared the link in the chat for the integration of scroll sites with Google Analytics, but do you want to add something there, David?
Yeah, I think there is a way of gathering feedback on articles using an integration with, I think HyperTalk is, it's like an external integration that provides comments for your articles, and I think there are either star or thumbs up, thumbs down ratings as well for people that wouldn't like to elaborate, but just express their satisfaction or dissatisfaction. So yeah, that is done using an external tool, since just keeping those comments and ratings spam free, I think that is very just a big task in itself. That's why we rely on experts there.
Cool. Thank you, David. Pat, Gabriela just shared the link in the chat as well. But okay, she's done it again. So cool. And David, you can also move to the next slide, I guess, because it's the Q&A thing.
Q&A, all right.
Okay, perfect. I did see another question from Marco or Laura actually. Initially about our challenge essentially about document migration. Obviously, it's a big topic now. Um, I think Chris already shared the link for the documentation migration guide that we have at for scroll apps that was essentially created from server to cloud or DC, but now it's relevant for DC end of life as well. Any other tips or guidance that you'd like to add here, David, for people who are now thinking about this migration?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot to share there. I think should start early, just at least with testing migrations and just like view the migration from Confluence, if it's data center to Confluence Cloud, as the new beginning that it is. Confluence data center and cloud are very different. And that is maybe not as true for end users that just use the default native features. But if you're heavy app users or many of your processes rely on certain app features being available, then I definitely recommend not to wait for the massive big move of data until you really deal with how those features, if they are available, work on cloud. I would definitely recommend just spin up a free Confluence instance. That's a Confluence Cloud instance that takes like 5 minutes, and then you can just install whatever you think might help you and just try to like remodel your workflow on there yourself. And because the earlier you start with this, the more time you will have to react to any sort of changes that might be there. And there are going to be changes. The editor, as Chris mentioned, is a different one. So there isn't the whole editor conversion topic, and app availability is different. And even for the same apps, functionality might be different between the data center and the cloud variants of that app. And you just need to be prepared, especially if you have to educate other people in your company.
Perfect. Perfect. Then there's another question by Lance. Scroll documentation recommends a separate Confluence space for every document. Is it not possible to maintain the documentation for multiple products on the same space using documents?
It is fully possible. We even had that in our example earlier with 3 separate documents being in the same space. And in general, like the concept of space really doesn't matter too much for scroll documents. The reason why we recommend using, if you have a large documentation that's not just like 12 pages maybe, the reason we recommend using a full space for it is that in general, I think just like I had this example in the presentation here about pages growing too long, and I think that very same thing happens to spaces as well. And the more granular your spaces are in general on Confluence Cloud, the better. And reasons for this are, firstly, like the more categories you have, the easier it is to like know where something is, because searching within a space is always more difficult than limiting your search, for example, to just one particularly small space. So you'll find things quicker. Another reason is access management in Confluence is just much more straightforward if you rely on permissions rather than restrictions. And permissions are generally granted on a space level. So especially in larger companies that are very or that might be more restrictive about who can perform what actions in their systems, there it's also easier to give every user that needs certain editing or viewing rights in a space to allocate all of those rights just using Confluence permissions, and not grant them permissions, but then restrict certain parts of the space from them that is just for the average user, it turns out to be easier to manage a single document in a single space. But if you know what you're doing, then having multiple documents is also perfectly fine.
Lance says, thank you. So you're welcome. Let's see if there are any other last questions. Otherwise, you can always reach out to us on the links provided above. So you can reach out via email or our help center. If you have any burning questions or anything that's unresolved, I guess we are definitely over time, but also out of questions. Then, okay, there is someone raised a hand. No, okay, probably just a wrong button. So it was just
I do that too.
Yeah, let's
I
do
always
that.
want to give a thumbs up, and I click the hand, and then it raises the hand immediately.
Okay, dokie. So then let's wrap it up. Thank you everyone for staying here this long. And I hope this was helpful. And have a good one. Let's see you
Thank you
in another.
for hosting this.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure. And yeah, see you in another session somewhere soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.